So you thought I was done with Branded. Well, friend, it's far from it, because we have not one, but 2 new episodes of the Branded Academy. If you haven't seen it yet, I've already made a bunch of Branded Academy episodes throughout the last year, in various formats, teaching players how to deck build, how to pilot, how to play, how to side, how to do technical play, all with Branded Despia. And now with this format, it seems like Branded is the only savior, well, sometimes, and a lot of people are still looking to learn about Branded and get into the game via Branded. It's probably one of the best budget decks currently, and I figured I should probably do an introduction video for those joining the Branded community in the Phantom Nightmare format. So, we're gonna do the 5th episode of the Branded Academy right now, and it's gonna be split into 2 parts. Part 1 is gonna be discussing the deck list that you need to play in Phantom Nightmare, the tech choices, and how to play the deck going first. But in part 2, we're gonna get a little bit deeper to find out how you actually play into the Fire King board, which is now seemingly a tier 0 deck. So there's a lot to look forward to, and if you're here to learn, I'm really happy and excited for you to be joining us in the Branded family. So, Branded Academy, Episode 5, the Phantom Nightmare format starts now. And before we start off this wonderful episode, I do have one quick giveaway. Nobody claimed this in the last giveaway, so I'm giving this away again. An Ultimate Rare European Branded Fusion. All you have to do is like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below your favorite Branded card. One of you will be getting this next live stream. Follow me on Twitter to know when exactly we're going to be drawing the winner. Let's continue. So this video is going to be a little bit longer and in-depth than usual. People are asking me for these videos all the time. Hands, combos, tutorials, how to actually pilot the deck. This is going to be no different than the other Branded Academy videos, but this is going to be tailored to the Phantom Nightmare format, and especially if you're just joining or picking up the deck at this time, it's going to be a little bit more challenging, and I'm not going to be sugarcoating it. And by sugarcoating, I mean that going into this format with Branded is definitely possible. We're going to look at an example that is a great example of a good Branded player that took down 700 people in a regional. So it is possible, but it's not always the case where you're just going to break the board because I'm going to hype up the deck and it's amazing. I'm going to be extremely realistic, and we're going to be looking at the deck itself, the tech choices, and we're going to be learning how to go first with the deck, how to play around and through hand traps, and overall just learn the thinking process behind piloting Branded Despia. So the deck list we're going to be looking at today is actually not my deck list, because why use my deck list when we have Alan Canchola from Mexico City taking down a 700 plus regional with, Branded Despia. In the Phantom Nightmare format, in the Fire King Tier 0 format, he actually managed to do that. So that's going to be on the screen right now, and as you can see, we have a very standard build that I personally really agree with. It's not really different than anything we've discussed so far on the channel, and it's overall standard. 2 Aluber is becoming a little bit more standard, just to not brick on too many normal summons. We have Maximus and the Dear Servant package. We have a Gimmick Puppet Nightmare that we're going to swap out for Ad Libitum, because I'm not going to be teaching you how to FTK. And then we have Thrust, Super Poly, Talents, Feather Duster as a non-engine of the deck. And we have a pretty wild side deck that we're not going to touch this episode. In the extra deck, we have a few interesting choices like 1 Mirror Jade and Queritis and Masquerade. And of course the Super Poly target and the Lulu Lilith for the Nadir Servant package. But now let's dive in and discuss the tech options. So let's go into the tabletop view and discuss some of the tech choices of this deck. So I'm going to start out with the reason you play Dogmatika Maximus. So Dogmatika Maximus is definitely not a new card to the Branded strategy. What it actually allows you to do is, specifically with Nadir Servant, you can extend after you get ashed. So, for example, Nadir Servant is the card that just allows you to extend after you get ashed. You get ashed on Branded Fusion, usually you will still be able to end on some board besides that, unless, you know, the only card in your hand was actually Branded Fusion. Now, in Nadir Servant, what it allows you to do is activate Nadir Servant, of course, and then you can send what we have in the deck here, you can send the Garura here. Now you get to draw an additional card. That could be non-engine, that could be another interruption. You draw the card and you search the Maximus, and then you can summon the Maximus by banishing the Garura from the graveyard. Now, in this format specifically, in other formats it might not have been as safe to activate Maximus here to send 2 cards from either player's extra deck, from both players' extra deck actually. But here I think if you're going up against Fire King most of the time, it's definitely 100% fine. Now what this can do is send a Titaniclad, an Albion, or a Lulu to allow you to extend your plays. And this is going to happen during the end phase like all the branded effects. Now, this package, what it does, you can, fill in the missing piece. If you already activated Branded Opening and you already have Quem on the field, you might not need Titaniclad, and you might want a Spell and Trap card to set in the end phase with Albion. If you already had Quem, you sent Albaz, now you want a Branded in red, so to make it live. And then Lulu is great because it gets you to Cartesia, and Cartesia is extremely powerful because you can manipulate the board whenever you want. So this is basically the utility of the Nadir package. Of course, in a crunch, this not only gives you the Maximus, this also gets you Quem, and this also gets you Albaz, because Quem is always considered a Dogmatika monster. So if you need Quem to extend and you haven't normal summoned yet, even though you got Ashed, you can still keep playing with Quem, and of course, grabbing an Albaz from the graveyard or the deck. This applies to all of them. You can bell this, of course, but you can also recycle your 1 Quem that we're playing in this list. Now, the second tech choice I want to discuss is Triple Tactics Thrust. This has been probably a mainstay of Branded ever since Cyberstorm Access-ish, right? So if you're not familiar with this specific interaction, why do we play Thrust? And specifically, why do we play Thrust and not play Crossout Designator? So Crossout requires you not only to run Crossout, but it also requires you to run the additional targets you want to negate. So if your deck, like Branded, can't really play a lot of hand traps, you're going to get much less value from the Crossout. What you could get value from is a card like Thrust. Now, if your opponent activates an effect, specifically we're discussing Ash Blossom on Branded Fusion, for example. Now, your opponent doesn't control monsters, so you can't really search for talents or any other way to extend, but what you could do is get Fusion Duplication. And if you're not aware of what this does, it targets the Branded Fusion you got ashed on in the graveyard, and it duplicates this the effect to this card, right? Similar to Rollback, for example. Now, the Fusion Duplication effect becomes the Branded Fusion effect, so you can't ash it because the effect is just copying the effect. Now, this could also copy Super Polymerization, and because it copies, it doesn't require you to pay the cost of discarding. So, just so you're aware, we might be discarding Super Poly to the graveyard in some instances just to get the value off of it. So this is why you play Thrust. Now, we've seen in the deck list that we have cards like Talents and Duster, and of course, Fusion Deployment and Branded Fusion are both normal spells as well. So going second with this might actually allow you to grab multiple Branded Fusions if you're going up against the negate board. So again, that's really, really helpful. And the last thing that we have in this list is a non-engine tech choice, right? Because again, Branded notoriously can't really play a lot of non-engine because the engine is really powerful, but it's also significantly big in terms of card space needed in the deck. So Super Poly, you know this card. It's a really, really good card. In the Fire Tier 0 format, people will start playing around this. So again, this is good because you can inherently run things like Garura, which you run for the Nadir Servant package, and of course Muddragon, which is also good because it provides additional targeting protection. So this is a relatively risk-free tech to run. Voiceless Voice, again, being probably the second most represented deck in this Tier 0 format, loses to this card heavily a lot of the time, specifically if they're going into the Dynamondo line. Now, yeah, this is basically, it's not super, revolutionary to play this card. I think that maybe a Branded build with a little bit more non-engine that is not necessarily Super Poly is good, because Super Poly, let's say your opponent ends on Flamberge, Ambler Whale, and the rest of the cards around it. So in the draw phase with priority, you can activate this. They cannot respond. You take away their monsters. They do summon back 2 or 3 monsters from the graveyard because of the Flamberge effect. And then you still have to play through their board, maybe without a Masquerena, but still a lot of the board kind of returns. So it gives you a body, but it's not always the correct play, but we do play this here. Now that we've covered the deck and the tech cards, I want to discuss the game plan. Where do we actually want to end up on when we fulfill our combo? Now, this is what I consider, barring like Gimmick Puppet, putting that to the side, we're not necessarily discussing it today. This is what I would consider the perfect end board, the optimal, the maximum end board that you should aspire to get to every time you go first. Right? Our goal will be to get as close as we can to this board based on what we have in our hand. And we're going to do the test hands, and with that, we're going to try to get as close to this end board. Now, this might be the end board you go to when you're not playing around hand traps, or you're not aware of anything, or especially going second, you're not going to end up on this board most of the time. But going first, I want to show you a picture of what the perfect end board looks like, so you know where your combo needs to go. I think a lot of the problems with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that decks don't really explain themselves really well, so if I gave you this branded deck, you would not have known that this is where you need to end up on with this combo. So let's start by breaking this down and understanding what we have here. So starting off, we have a Mirror Jade. Now, Mirror Jade, if you don't know what it does, it banishes a monster without targeting, which is a really, really strong effect. Now, combining Mirror Jade with Quem and Cartesia on the board and Branded Lost with Ad Libitum in the graveyard means that in this type of end board, you will have between 2 and 3 effects of Mirror Jade, because it is what is known as soft once per turn. It is not a hard once per turn per copy, so if you remove it from the field and return it, you can activate the effect again. So the way you would do that is activate the Mirror Jade and then go Cartesia, for example, with these two into something like, let's say a Dragostapelia, right? Going to a Dragostapelia, and then on resolution, Quem can activate because a card is left the extra deck, can summon back the Mirror Jade. You can activate the Mirror Jade again, and afterwards, you can activate Branded in Red, use, let's say, these 3 cards into something like a Guardian Chimera, right? And then you get to activate the effect of Ad Libitum, which, when used as fusion material, can summon back a fusion, and then you can summon Mirror Jade again, and you can activate the effect a 3rd time. So this is probably your most significant way of interrupting your opponent, right? Because especially in this format as well, the removal is just so incredibly strong, and this is why we want to end on all of these. Now, additional things that this gives you is things that we saw here. For example, we saw things like Dragostapelia that you can go into. Now, this is just additionally above your board, right? You have Dragostapelia that you can go into, you have Guardian Chimera that you can go into, you have even cards like Titanic the Ash Dragon that you can go into, and Rindbrum that you can go into. And most of these as well are using the effect of Fallen of Albaz from the graveyard, because your cost with Mirror Jade can be, for example, Rindbrum, right? You send the Rindbrum to the graveyard, Rindbrum will summon the Albaz to your field, then you can fuse away into, something like, not this specifically, but Dragostapelia if your opponent summons a fusion, another card, for example, just to get rid of a body, and this doesn't only give you an interruption, it also gives you a removal with Albaz's effect. So this is on top of what you see here. Now, in addition to that, you also have, of course, a monster negate with Mercurier, and you have a way to stop your opponent from responding to effects, right? So this is already so much, right? And this is not even only that. This is just, the most basic plays that you can do, but you can get a lot more creative, and we're going to see that in part 2 when we go second against decks. Now, every time you play this deck, you need to be thinking how you can maximize your end board. And a lot of the times you're going to be met with decisions, and sometimes you're not going to be able to accomplish the full board like this. But you need to be considerate of that when you're playing, that this should be one of your end goals. Now that we've established this, we can go ahead and start playing going first. We're going to be shuffling the deck, and we're going to be talking about the decision-making process, what I'm thinking about when I'm playing the deck, and how I can get as close as possible to this hand board, considering interruptions, hand traps, and optimal lines of play. So as I'm shuffling up the deck, I do want to talk about some things that we're going to be taking into account here. Again, as I mentioned before, the main question for me will be, how do I get as close as possible to the end board that we just saw through anything that my opponent can throw at me, right? My thought process should be getting to the optimal end board, and this is what I'm going to be talking about throughout the entire combo or hand that I'm going to be playing. Now, the second thing that prevents me from doing that is playing through and around hand traps. Sometimes you will not go balls to the wall, and this is extremely important to understand and know that in order to not lose to one single hand trap, you're going to be playing a little bit differently. So it's always going to be about trade-offs and making concessions in order to maximize the potential of not only winning, but not getting hand trapped and having my turn stopped whatsoever. Now, after we do that, I do want to talk about how do we tailor our board going first if this is not game one, things that we need to consider going up against specific decks, and especially with the Fire King format, how do we survive the OTK if possible. Now, I shuffled this in front of you so you would know, and I'm not going to be sugarcoating any hands. If a hand is bad, this is part of the game, and we're going to be shuffling again. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video, but I want you to see the realism in it. So we're going to draw our 5 cards, and this is us going first, and let's start by discussing what we have and the thought process that goes into it. We have Cartesia, Quem, Aluber, Deployment, and Maximus. This is the hand. Now, this is a pretty good hand. This is also why probably we're playing 2 Alubers and not 3, because you definitely don't want to see a combination of these two when you have 2 normal summons. Now, we have to make a pretty big decision here, and the decision is, what do we normal summon, right? We want to get to our end board as close as possible, and I think we could get there relatively easily, but we do have a decision to make on what do we do with these two, because we can only normal summon one of them. So thankfully we have another Cartesian deck, so we don't have to go super neg. And what I would usually do in this hand specifically, I want to prioritize getting into Branded Fusion, and I also want to play around Imperm, right? So one way to go is special summon Cartesia from the deck, right? Special summon Cartesia from the deck, and then we can normal summon the Aluber and keep playing. I think even if we get ashed, we are still good, so I'm going to go with the same line, because let's say we get ashed on Branded Fusion, we go Granganiol into Garura, we draw a card, then we summon the Maximus, and we can still keep playing and end on some card. So I think this is the line that we're going to do here. Good thing that we have the Fusion Deployment, and we do have some dead cards in hand, but I think this is why you try to deck build as optimally as possible, and this is the reason why there's 2 Aluber. Special summon the Cartesia by revealing the Granganiol, and now we are protected from Imperm, we're protected from Veiler, and we're also going to be protected from Droll, because the first time we search, it's going to be the Aluber. No one's gonna Imperm you here. No one, right? This Cartesia will stay on the board until the end of the turn, and we're gonna get pretty close to the maximum end board. It's really unfortunate that we drew the one of Quem, but we'll try to figure out a way to reach that a little bit later. Now, Branded Fusion will resolve. And if we get ashed here, what I would do is turn these 2 into a Granganiol, send the Garura, draw an additional card, maybe even draw into a Thrust, right? Or even a talents, better yet. And we can go Maximus, and Maximus can send, let's say, Titanic Lad or Albion and Lulu summons from the hand, right? So we're going to try to get to it in order to get to the maximum end board. We might do this here as well. But we're assuming the brand fusion has resolved, and this is the very, very basic line here, right? This is the very, very basic line. We're going to be sending Fallen of Albaz and the Bestial Lubellion to summon Albion the Branded Dragon. Now again, you are extremely protected from any sort of Imperm or Veiler, so we're going to be activating this. Now, we're going to be banishing the Aluber and the Fallen of Albaz, and we're going to be summoning Lubellion here. Again, you are protected with Cartesia, and we're going to be holding on to this Cartesia. Even though fusing these now gets you a free body, it is a little bit too risky, and I wouldn't do that line. Now, we have a decision to make, and we have a discard, right? Option number one is Cartesia, which is a pretty bad option, because we're going to be able to have this Cartesia back during the end phase, because this is going to hit the graveyard, because we're going to be fusing with it a little bit later. Sending this to the graveyard does give us a branded in red target if we want to send something else with Grand Guignol. If we don't want to send, let's say, the Ad Libitum, which we probably would in this scenario. This is kind of risk-free, because we're not going to be able to summon this, because we're not going to have a fusion that we want to banish. So the only thing I'm thinking about is, honestly, between these two, can I get to the Squam? So let me think in my head. We're going to be making this. Grand Guignol is going to be sending Ad Libitum. Is there a way where I send Lulu here in order to get the Squam, and then Quem sends Albaz, and I give up the Ad Libitum in order to get a Quem on the board? I'm not 100% sure it's worth it, right? But I definitely want to keep it. Yeah? So what we're going to do is we're going to be discarding the Maximus. I think Quem and Maximus here are fine. Because I want the Adlib, I'm going to be giving up this Quem summon with Lulu. And then we're going to be able to shuffle back the Albaz to the deck and the Lubellion to the deck and get ourselves a copy of Mirror Jade. So far, pretty good. Now, tributing this for the Bestial Lubellion. Bestial Lubellion effect will grab us the Branded Lost from the deck, which will soon grab us another card as well. And Branded Lost is always here. Now we can activate the Cartesia here. Cartesia fuses with these two, and we're going to be going into a Grand Guignol, the Dusk Dragon. Now, chain 1, chain 2, I'm going to be adding Mercurior to our hand, and we're going to be sending the Ad Libitum to the graveyard here, because we already have an Albion, right? This would be a different discussion if we didn't have the Quem here, correct? Okay. So, what do we have here? We're also going to be activating the Cartesia effect in the graveyard to come back to the hand during the end phase, and then we're going to be getting branded in red through the effect of Albion the Branded Dragon, right? Now, this is relatively close to the end board. The perfect end board is kind of hard to get to because it's probably a 2-3 card combo, and it's not extremely common to get to. But this is an extremely solid hand board, right? You can make a lot of interesting things during the opponent's turn. You can, of course, activate the Mirror Jade, right? Then you can go into, in red, go into a Dragostapelia to get another negate, summon back the Mirror Jade with the Ad Libitum that you used. You get another search, you get Albion here, and the really sad thing is that this Grand Guignol is not going to be able to grab a Squam, but this Grand Guignol in most cases is going to enable us to just summon Lulu because we haven't used it, and then during the end phase, if this goes to the graveyard, we can get something else back. So this is 2 Mirror Jades, a negate, another negate, and possibly turn this negate into something like Guardian Chimera to pop. So this was, again, a pretty okay hand, getting to a lot of potential on the end board. Let's go do another hand, shuffle it up, and see what we have. So yeah, this was relatively standard stuff, but I think the minute interactions and the things that go over in your hand, this was a hand that it was kind of possible to play around almost all of the hand traps, so that was really, really good to consider that. Let's see if we have another hand that gives us a little bit of a complicated decision-making process. Let's draw for turn, talents, branded fusion, duplication, or courier, and called by the grave. This is an interesting hand, to be honest, because we have to go straight into branded fusion. Now, the good thing is that the branded fusion is going to resolve, which is really, really good. But considering that it wouldn't have resolved otherwise, if you get ashed on this, you also have duplication to back it up, and talents to either look at your opponent's hand or draw 2 additional cards to get a starter. But let's say, and this is a very good experiment, right, that we're only going to be starting with branded fusion. Now, branded fusion, what can it actually give us in this scenario, right? We have going up straight into Albion. The problem with this is that we don't really have any other monsters to banish. So the Albaz will hit the graveyard, right? It will hit the graveyard, but we're going to have to banish that Albaz and this Albion in order to go into a Mirror Jade, which is less than optimal, right? We can go straight into Rindbrum because we have another Mercurier in the deck, right? We can go into Titaniclad or Sanctifier. Sanctifier is not necessarily a super bad idea, but probably your best option would be Lubellion. Why Lubellion specifically? Because Lubellion can be summoned using Tragedy, and Tragedy searches you an extender for the combo, right? So we're definitely going to go, in this hand, straight into Lubellion, and we're going to be sending Fallen of Albaz, and we're also going to be sending Tragedy, right? So it's good because we have the duplication in the hand to fire off another branded fusion next turn, so we don't have to go extremely balls to the wall on this one, right? Now, Chainlink 1 is going to be Lubellion, and in this specific hand, I would probably discard the talent, especially if no hand traps were used. If my opponent did use a hand trap, I might discard the Called By or the Mercurier even, just to keep myself options and, look at the hand. It's really, really powerful. But in this scenario, we're going to be discarding the talent and we're going to be activating Tragedy. Now, we have to think about what this Tragedy can actually provide us. And given the thought process in your hand that the only monster in your graveyard afterwards is going to be Tragedy, right? This will be shuffled. So, grabbing an Eluber, what does the Eluber search? Grabbing a Quem, what does the Quem search? These are our options, and we need to consider what actually comes out of it. And remember, this is going to be the only monster in our graveyard. So, I personally think that, okay, so let's break it down and talk about our 2 options, right? Now, what you could do, okay, so Aluber. What can Aluber provide us? It can get us branded in red, right? That we can set, because we're probably not going to get to an Albion in the graveyard this turn, which is okay. It's not always going to be the case. And this is the most value that Aluber is going to get us here. Quem, on the other hand, is going to be able to grab us a few things. One, we can normal summon Quem, send Cartesia to the graveyard. When we activate the Mirror Jade, we can summon back that Cartesia, and that Cartesia can go into a Granguignol or into anything else that could be of value to us. The other thing that Quem can do is send us a Fallen of Albaz, so we have a Fallen of Albaz in the graveyard in order to fuse on our opponent's turn, again using Quem's effect. So Quem is already providing us an additional line of play that Aluber doesn't, and I think this is why I'm going to pick the Quem here specifically, because we already went through Branded Fusion. So we search the Quem here, and then we shuffle these 2. This is our graveyard, and we go into a Mirror Jade. This is what we have at this point. right? We already have a lot of good non-engine, which is extremely worth it. Now, another thing that this Quem is going to be able to do, which we didn't discuss before that, is thinking ahead with fusion duplication. Fusion duplication is actually going to be able to grab us the Cartesia later on. So let's go with the Quem here. We normal summon the Quem. Now, before we decide what we're going to be sending, we have to think about what this fusion duplication is going to be able to get us. What value are we going to get from this fusion duplication? So this fusion duplication is going to be getting us a summon back from the graveyard with Quem, because a card is going to be leaving the extra deck, right? Now, what is the best play here if we consider everything that we have in the extra deck, right? We can go into another Albion, and this Albion is going to be able to send Albaz and Cartesia from the deck, and then chain 1 Albion, chain 2 Quem to bring back the Cartesia. And then what does this summon? This probably can go into another Lubellion, which can go into a Dragus Tupelia if we discard the Mercurier or if we keep the Called by the Grave. So we have to think a lot of steps ahead in order to figure out what we actually do. Again, we don't necessarily know what we're playing up against, so we don't know what's going to be the best line of play, but this is something that we have to consider in order to maximize the potential here. So, in my opinion, the best thing that you can do here is probably the safest bet will be to, I'm still contemplating between these two because these are going to be our options, right? We could send Branded Retribution, but that's definitely not going to be helpful because we want to resolve this fusion duplication. Now, if we send the Albaz, we're going to have 2 Albaz in the graveyard eventually because of fusion duplication. And if we send the Cartesia here, we don't have to send Cartesia afterwards. We can send Lubellion, which is going to be good for the next turn afterwards. So I think this is going to be probably the best case scenario because it's much easier to negate Quem and lock us out of this Cartesia than negating this. So if this, I don't know, they called by this or foolish return this in the draw phase, we're still going to be able to get to another Cartesia, right? And we don't want 2 Albas in the grave. We want as many of them in the deck because we're going to have another one of them, right? So this is it. There was another option where Tragedy doesn't activate the effect here, but we're not going to be discussing that. Now, as mentioned before, do we need a card in hand here for future effects, right? I think setting these two is absolutely fine. This one, if you draw this, lucky you in the Fire King matchup, right? So we're going to be setting these two, and then we still have a negate on top of this in the hand. Now, during our opponent's turn, Mirror Jade can activate the effect, send whatever, right? Probably would send Rindbrum as my first summon, yeah? Then on resolution, we're going to be able to grab this Cartesia back, and this Cartesia can, for example, grab us a Granganule later, right? But what we could do is go for a fusion duplication, and then here we can again decide on what exactly we want to summon, right? So it's going to be Albaz for sure, yeah? And this Albaz can also be a target for Rindbrum, which is really good, yeah? And then probably, in my opinion, I would probably send a Serenir in this specific scenario, right? It really depends on whether we need to use this Mercurier. You could also go straight into Sanctifier. It really depends on your opponent's board. But then, what you could do is go for the Lubellion here. Lubellion is going to be chain 1. We're going to be discarding this, right? If we have to. We don't necessarily will have to do this, but it's kind of a thinking process behind the Branded Fusion, or the Fusion Duplication at least, so this should be banished. And then chain 2 Serenir is going to grab us follow-up, and we're going to be dumping Retribution from the deck to the graveyard, right? And then if we need another card in hand, we can't activate this because we don't have any branded spells and traps, right? So maybe this is not specifically good to send here. Maybe it's just going to be branded opening to protect us from destruction. I think will be extremely helpful in this scenario. Yeah? So then you can shuffle back this, you can shuffle back the Serenir, or even the Mercurier here if you want to. Mercurier could be of value because you can summon it with Quem and it's actually a negate on board. And then we're going to go into a Dragostapelia. Right? Now, when you need the Albaz, you can go Cartesia. Yeah, you can use the Cartesia and the Mirror Jade and go into a Granguignol, and then Granguignol, let's see what we can send here with the Granguignol. Yeah, we could send, we already sent Serenir, so this could possibly grab us, just send us a Garura. We draw one, we have another card in hand for when we want to activate Albaz, Rindbrum to Albaz, and we got rid of our Mirror Jade here, and then we can banish the Rindbrum, summon back the Albaz, discard the deployment, and then make whatever we need to with the monsters that we have available, right? So this is going to be one interruption, an Albaz removal, a banish. We had another possible negate in the hand as well before that. So opening with only Branded Fusion, as you've seen, isn't always ideal because you will kind of have to go in circles in order to achieve a proper board. And I think this is where we're going to be ending part 1 in. And in part 2, what we're going to be doing is going through more hands and playing against interruptions. This is mainly what I want to do in part 2. I don't want this video to run for too long, but it is a very technical video that I do want to deal with, and people need to, you know, sit down and actually learn. I don't want it to be too long, but this is a very technical video, so there's not a lot of choice here. So what we've seen here is the tech choices and why you play them. And then we saw a little bit about the decision making behind building a board and what interruptions specifically to go to. Again, in part 2, we're going to be doing the same thing, but we're going to be playing against a board and we're going to be trying to break that board and trying to bait the interruptions as best as we can. So thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below your thoughts and suggestions about this Branded Academy video, and of course turn on the bell because next week we have another episode of the Branded Academy and we're going to be looking at breaking boards. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.